Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, July 11th, 2024. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Genevieve Guenther, author of The Language of Climate Politics, Fossil Fuel Propaganda, and How to Fight It. And later in the show, Ettingermentum of the Ettingermentum newsletter will be with us to talk about polling, Biden, and what Ettingermentum saw coming and the rest of us maybe didn't. Also on the program today, good economic numbers, at least in theory, with inflation falling, putting the consumer price index at its lowest in 3 years. Those should be narratives that are strengths for Biden, but they're obviously being overshadowed by increasing calls for him to drop out. Obama reportedly gave George Clooney the okay, at the very least, to air out Biden's mental decline in the New York Times. After hearing from the Baileys, I guess, Schumer tells donors he's open to Biden stepping aside. Pelosi tells members to start telling Biden to step down if they so choose. Peter Welsh becomes the first senator to officially call on him to withdraw. And in Gaza, Israel kills dozens, striking its 4th school in 4 days. A deliberate attempt to undermine a ceasefire, more on that in just a second. And the U.S. restarts shipments of 500-pound bombs to Israel and announced more jets to Ukraine. AOC introduces articles of impeachment against Supreme Court Justices Thomas and Alito. That's called doing politics. But this is also doing politics. She loses DSA's endorsement over her participation in a panel that conflates anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. Trump's claims that he knew nothing about Project 2025, undercut by an investigation that finds 140 people who worked for him are involved. Senate Republicans block Democrats' bill to codify Roe v. Wade into law. And in Arkansas, the Republican governor says abortion advocates have some paperwork issues, and so you can't be on the ballot. Very convenient. And lastly, millions still without power after Hurricane Beryl hit Texas. A searing heat approaches as well, and Houston area hospitals are overrun. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome to the show, everybody. It is an Majority Report Thursday. Hello, hello. We've got a lot of news to get to. Say hello to Matt Leck.
Hola.
Say hello to Bradley Alsop.
I was waving big off camera.
Okay.
Also,
yeah,
folks,
we felt that energy.
Speaking of Houston, I want to hear from people in Houston in the fun half, so we'll take calls. Just keep that in mind.
Yes.
If you're from Houston particularly and know or are yourself affected by the power outage, it's such a failure. And, you know, while we wait on the dotard decide if he's going to go to bring us all down with the ship, it's like, it's not even going down with the ship. It's like the captain of the Titanic saying, actually, like, nobody.
It's a suicide
Nobody can go to those lifeboats. Actually, we haven't hit an iceberg. But yeah, I want to hear from people in Houston.
Mike from Queens says, hey, Emma, just a clarification. AOC lost the endorsement of the DSA nationally. She's still endorsed by New York City DSA. That is, I'm Mike from Queens. I would have to check that out. I don't know how that works from their
Yeah, we'll try to
structural
clarify that.
perspective,
I
but
thought
we'll
it
try and
was.
clarify.
I thought it was the local initiated it, and then the national approved it. But I don't know. So maybe we can get some DSA people to clarify. More DSA people to
We'll
give
get
us a source on that.
Yeah, some more clarification on that in a bit. But since we'll be talking to Ettingermentum about the Biden campaign, I wanted to start with this massive story out of Haaretz, which, look, I wish more Israelis read Haaretz, but unfortunately, they're still kind of pigeonholed as a lefty paper that hates Israel or something like that.
And it plays a weird role for Americans too, where they'll publish things that maybe Mondoweiss got to, or like sort of hinted at
Early
before,
on.
and Haaretz will use its resources, and it being a sort of liberal Zionist paper with more credibility than people want to give maybe a non-Israeli paper on things like this to sort of confirm things that have long been suspected.
Right. And they do have the sourcing and also capabilities to confirm things and get Israeli government officials to speak to them in the way that, say, a Mondoweiss or an Al Jazeera absolutely could not. And that's what this article in particular serves. But to set it all up, we've all been, of course, obsessing over the presidential race and Biden, understandably. But in Gaza, the horrors continue. As I said, Israel has struck its fourth school where people have been sheltering in fourth days. And no doubt taking advantage of the way that the U.S. media, the president for that matter, is distracted by his campaign woes. A CNN investigation into one of the bombings of the school, I think this one that was in Khan Yunis, found that U.S.-made bombs were used, including a high-precision munition that was analyzed, and that munition was made by Boeing, according to a CNN investigation. And all in the backdrop of this is that ceasefire talks are happening in Cairo. The IDF is doing this as the ceasefire talks are supposedly happening, and they're striking schools, ramping up airstrikes on Gaza City, where many Palestinians are refusing to leave. Again, they're exhausted, they're defiant. Israel's demanding they leave, and this could be another massacre because of that very reason, because a lot of Palestinians are saying, I would rather die here than leave. And you can't view this increase in violence as anything more than a deliberate attempt to antagonize Hamas and Palestinians in these ceasefire negotiations so that they collapse. Because if Israel was earnestly interested in ceasing hostilities, they wouldn't do anything to endanger the talks in the most crucial days. They wouldn't include non-negotiable provisions in their ceasefire proposal, air quotes for the podcast audience, that include things like Israel gets to start firing again if we want. That's not a ceasing of fire if they get to do what they want. It is a display of immense arrogance and obviously genocidal intent. And now there's even more underscoring that attempt, or undergirding, I should say, making it more clear how this has happened. Haaretz's piece, How Netanyahu Has Systemically Foiled Talks to Release Hostages from Hamas Captivity, show that this is a deliberate strategy and has been since at least the beginning of the year by Netanyahu to sabotage ceasefire negotiations. The past 6 months, during which Israel negotiated a framework for the release of Israeli hostages being held captive by Hamas in the Gaza Strip, were riddled with hopeful moments that shattered one after the other. While Hamas impeded the talks, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu repeatedly torpedoed their progress, particularly when it came to decisive moments. Netanyahu believes that an agreement on a hostage deal will most likely lead to his government's collapse, which he seeks to avoid at all costs. Defense officials who spoke with Haaretz said that in his attempt to derail negotiations, Netanyahu relied on classified intelligence and manipulated the sensitive information. This is how Netanyahu systemically foiled the negotiations to free the hostages. Here are some of the instances. They lay out a timeline quite clearly in this piece that I wanted to highlight for people. This was the beginning of what they could find in his deliberate attempts to sabotage January 17th
And
here.
sorry, before you get to January 17th, we should just point out the other thing Haaretz got to, which was suspected, which was use of the Hannibal Directive on October 7th itself, turning the area back near Gaza an extermination zone, basically firing on any vehicles taking hostages back into Gaza. So Israel's Netanyahu and the IDF's treatment of hostages, I would start at that point where they started
on
firing
October 7th,
them.
right? Because
And we don't know if it was tens or hundreds of civilians that were killed in that, but the people standing in the way of an investigation in that is Bibi and the IDF.
and you can also basically point to the fact that I just lost my train of thought. But at that point in particular, this is what I want to say, that it's not just that Netanyahu wants to stay in power by elongating the hostilities. It's also that an investigation into that very fact will also happen if he is out of power.
Yeah.
That's the existential, like his failures on October 7th. How many are actually dead in Gaza right now? These are things that would happen if a ceasefire was reached. So this is the beginning of, reportedly, of his sabotage. January 17th in the preparations for the first Paris summit. Some 6 weeks after the deal that saw 125 hostages released, Israel began preparing to negotiate a new agreement. A central part of the negotiating team's strategy approved by the War Cabinet, which has since been disbanded, was to refrain from discussing the number of Palestinian prisoners to be released for every hostage. It was assumed that this volatile issue could derail the negotiations, and negotiators sought to first create the appropriate conditions to discuss it. Contrary to the cabinet's decision, Netanyahu began leaking information on the prisoners released to reporters and present hardline positions. Some in Israel's negotiating teams accused Netanyahu of cultivating public opposition to the deal. Now, this has been hinted at by other reporters, that Netanyahu has been the source for a lot of their articles, but it's considered really bad journalistic practices to reveal your sources. But clearly there was some sort of consensus reached that it's like when it's the actual prime minister and he is actively sabotaging deals to bring the hostages home, which is what Israelis care about, then okay, like maybe all bets are off here.
Yeah, because you're clearly being instrumentalized by a guy doing a genocide. So I would say maybe it's time to maybe reassess the ethics.
Okay, all right. But what I'm expecting very little right now of an Israeli public where the majority think we need to be bombing more in Gaza.
Right.
Now let's turn to January 28th through the 31st, the first Paris summit, another moment of sabotage. On January 28th, Israel's Mossad head met with mediators in Paris for the first time, and the progress achieved was described as significant. Yet upon Barnea's return to Israel, Netanyahu published a series of 5 press releases in which he emphasized the gaps that remain between the sides. Defense officials who spoke to Haaretz claimed that Netanyahu used information that was brought up in private security talks and left the door open to derail the deal. So, again, just think of how many tens of thousands have been killed since that period and how Netanyahu deliberately undermined his own negotiators and made a mockery of the United States with Biden's assist by taking this extreme genocidal freak at his word. And so they had more time to keep killing. February 6th. February saw Israel make considerable efforts. Could we scroll down, Bradley? February saw Israel make considerable efforts to reach a deal before the holy month of Ramadan begins. Shin Bet head Ronen Bar tried to push forward with a humanitarian deal, leveraging the urgent need for humanitarian aid in the Gaza Strip. That same month, Netanyahu decides on a new strategy. He permits the negotiating team to hold talks with the mediators, but forbids the members from presenting their position or from making proposals. Netanyahu only allows them to listen. On February 6, Hamas releases a written statement in which it wrote, it, quote, treated the framework positively. Netanyahu responds immediately, releasing a statement by a senior Israeli official saying that Hamas's answer to the hostage deal is actually negative, and adding that Israel has no intention in stopping the war. On that same week, according to Israel's Channel 13, Netanyahu instructed Likud ministers to attack the deal that was taking shape. So you can see here how it's quite clear what the strategy is by Netanyahu. And this continues all up until, we don't need to go through every example, but this one stuck out to me as well. If we go to when Biden tried to kind of force the issue by making the speech. June 1st, Israel relays a hostage release framework to the mediators, but Netanyahu refuses to present it to the public. On June 1st, U.S. President Joe Biden presents the framework in a public speech. This is the same proposal being discussed these days. After Biden's speech, Netanyahu releases several statements meant to impede progress. Israel's conditions for ending the war have not changed, said one of his statements, and they include destroying the military and governing capabilities. There will be no ceasefire if these conditions are not met. Meanwhile, Netanyahu aides sent messages to journalists claiming, not in Netanyahu's name, that there is a, quote, slim chance for a deal. We're headed towards a dead end. Now, a reminder that Biden had presented that to the American public as an Israeli ceasefire proposal. So you can see here where someone like Barak Ravid of Axios is getting these leaks about the Israeli negotiators' intentions, and I don't know, I don't have any reason to believe that they weren't acting in like their very narrow role in earnest, because of the way that those things are fractured, I guess, and they were probably given very specific directives. But you see early on, Netanyahu was saying that they can't even make any offers without his okay. And then he would go back and say that the terms were unacceptable. So the point is that he deliberately handcuffed his own negotiators for months in order to ensure that a ceasefire proposal was not reached, and then did another tactic of leaking the sensitive information to the media that was agreed upon to not be released, so that he could try to sway public opinion to turn them against a ceasefire.
And then Joe Biden can get up and ramble about how, actually, no, it really is their proposal. They won't, admit to it. Maybe it was just a line that they gave us. And I think it is says enough about the intentions of our government that we're still treating Israel like a good faith actor in these negotiations.
Right. The last thing I'll say here, this was a quote from one of the senior members of the negotiating team. "I can't say that without Netanyahu there would be no deal," said the official presented as D. "I can say that the probability of a deal would be higher. Since December, definitely since January, it's clear to everyone that we're not conducting negotiations. It happens again and again. You get a mandate during the day, then the prime minister makes phone calls at night, instructs don't say that, and I'm not approving this, thus bypassing both the team leaders and the war cabinet. And the war cabinet has since been dissolved, and Ben-Gvir, Smotrich calling the shots, and Netanyahu happily going along with them. The true source of power in the Israeli government are these extremists. And let's be clear, it's not a Netanyahu problem. It's the natural progression of what we've enabled in Israel. By not being a good faith negotiator with Palestinians and with giving Israel unlimited weaponry and allowing them to do whatever they wanted. So, with that said, we have a word from our sponsors, EarthBreeze. EarthBreeze Eco Sheets look just like a dryer sheet, but it's ultra-concentrated liquidless laundry detergent. It is the best of all worlds. EarthBreeze is tough on stains and odors while being kind to the planet and your skin. And EarthBreeze is great because it takes up virtually zero space. Those massive tubs of detergent that are sticky and they get all over the place. And they also have plastic that we all know now how difficult it is to get rid of plastic. You don't have to feel guilty about it, and you save space in your apartment. And EarthBreeze has a deal for you. Right now, you can subscribe to EarthBreeze and save 40%. Go to earthbreeze.com/majority to get started. We'd like to thank EarthBreeze for supporting our show. EarthBreeze Eco Sheets are dermatologist-tested, hypoallergenic, and free of bleach, dyes, and parabens. There is also a fragrance-free option. EarthBreeze got rid of the unnecessary chemicals for a formula that is kind to sensitive skin of all ages, including babies. With EarthBreeze, there's no more heavy lifting or measuring sticky blue goo from a massive plastic jug. I'll say, it's when you gotta walk to the grocery store here in New York, This saves you a lot of sweat in the summer. EarthBreeze offers flexible subscriptions delivered via carbon offset shipping right to your door for free because unfortunately you'll never run out of laundry, but now you'll also never run out of detergent. I think you should give it a try. And if you decide to go back to your old stuff for any reason, you'll get a full refund on your EarthBreeze purchase, no questions asked. These tiny sheets can stop millions of detergent jugs from entering our ecosystems. In fact, 500 million detergent jugs end up in landfills and oceans every year. 91% of single-use plastic does not get recycled, including the stuff we put in our recycling bins. And scientists say the ocean will have more plastic in it than fish by the year 2050. Making a positive impact in the world doesn't have to come at a cost to you. My clothes are clean, they smell great, and I feel like I'm actually doing something good just by doing my laundry. Right now, my listeners can receive 40% off EarthBreeze by going to just going to earthbreeze.com/majority. That's earthbreeze.com/majority to cut out single-use plastic in your laundry room and claim 40% off your subscription. And lastly, shaving is a pain. And it's also way overpriced. You go to the store, they mark up those multi-blade razors, and it just they're gouging people.
I'm not going to ask a
Planned
service employee
obsolescence.
to come unlock a Fort Knox style setup to get some razor blades either.
That are overpriced when you could just make an investment in Henson Shaving. Henson Shaving is a family-owned aerospace manufacturer that has made parts for the ISS, International Space Station, and Mars rover, and now they are bringing precision engineering to your shaving experience. Razor boards are like diving boards. The longer the board, the more wobble. The more wobble, the more nicks, cuts, and scrapes. A bad shave is not a blade problem. It's an extension problem. By using aerospace-grade computer numerical control machines, Henson makes metal razors that extend just 0.0013 inches, which is less than the thickness of a human hair. That means a secure and stable blade with a vibration-free shave. It gets better. The razor has built-in channels to evacuate hair and cream, which makes clogging virtually impossible. Seriously, Henson Shaving wants the best razor, not the best razor business. That means no plastic, no subscriptions, no proprietary blades, and no planned obsolescence. The Henson razor works with standard dual-edge blades to give you that old-school shave with the benefits of new-school tech. Once you own a Henson razor, it's only about $3 to $5 per year to replace the blades. That's what's amazing. The razor's not even, you're going to have it for the rest of your life or for as long as you decide to keep shaving. It's metal, it fits nicely in your hand. You invest in that razor, and then, as you say, you barely spend any money on blades for an entire year. I can't recommend this more highly. My fiance loves it. It's just a great service for people that are shaving and don't want to have to spend a lot of money for a lesser product. It's time to say no to subscriptions and yes to a razor that'll last you a lifetime. Visit hensonshaving.com/majority to pick the razor for you and use code majority, and you'll get 2 years worth of blades free with your razor. Just make sure to add them to your cart. That's 100 free blades when you head to HENSON shaving.com/majority and use code majority. We'll put a link to all of this in the description wherever people are listening to or watching this. All right, quick break, and we will be back with Dr. Genevieve Guenther. We are back, and we are joined now by Dr. Genevieve Guenther, founding director of EndClimateScience.org, affiliate faculty at the Tishman Environment and Design Center at the New School, and author of The Language of Climate Politics, Fossil Fuel Propaganda, and How to Fight It. Thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, we're all seeing what's happening in Houston, the increase in these horrific weather events that are just going to ramp up as climate change continues to make itself, the effects of it on the rest of the population, it'll just continue to increase. And I think a lot of us are feeling quite disempowered. Your book does give a roadmap, though, to feeling more empowered, which I really appreciated. But let's, I guess, start here. We can, I think, easily identify the most insane climate change denial. You know, Trump saying it's a Chinese hoax or whatever. But there are more quotidian, pernicious, subtle forms of denial that I hadn't really considered until I read your book. Let's start there. What are some of those forms that you identified?
Sure. Again, thanks for having me on. Let me just start by saying that, yes, the impacts of global heating are going to continue to get worse, but only until we stop using coal, oil, and gas and create an economy that just puts out net zero emissions. So we stop adding greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. Once we do that, global warming will halt, and essentially the climate will stabilize into a new normal, and we'll be able to adapt to the extreme weather we have then. The problem is that right now we are not we're not phasing out coal, oil, and gas. We're still developing them. American banks, American oil and gas companies, petrostates around the world are pouring money into new fossil fuel extraction, and this is going exactly in the opposite direction. So what my book does, it talks about this new climate denial, where everyone sort of acknowledges that climate change is real, aside from the really crazy MAGA people who are still calling it a hoax, even as like the very seat of the fossil fuel industry is underwater. Most people, even like the Saudis, for example, acknowledge that climate change is real and that we have to do something about it. But they're advancing a new climate denial, which says we can keep using fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas, and still halt global heating anyway. So this is the narrative. You may have heard it on the news media, from your friends and family, just sort of circulating around in public discourse. It goes something like this. So yes, climate change is real. But to say that it's a danger to our children, the people who are living in our homes already today, is just, quote, alarmist. And anyway, it'll, quote, cost too much to phase out coal, oil, and gas. So the best thing to do is just like rev up our economy and go for more economic, quote, growth, because wealthy people don't suffer the climate impacts as much as poor people do. And anyway, what we can do instead of phasing out fossil fuels is increase innovation and increase resilience. And anyway, we don't want to do anything in the United States because emissions are still rising in, quote, India and China. So what my book does, it takes these terms, these 6 terms in that narrative, and chapter by chapter kind of dismantles them, shows how they're used as fossil fuel propaganda, and offers readers new terms, a new vocabulary, new strategies for talking about the climate crisis that can overcome that new climate denial and really get fossil fuels out of our system in time to create a livable future.
So I guess that's a great framework, I think, for us to talk about some of the myths and the language that does so much work for climate denial. I don't understand how in one breath we can have, you know, people who are meteorologists or people that work on television say a few times a year that this is a once in a lifetime weather event, because just by that time frame, it's quite easy to dispel.
Right.
Those are some things that you discuss as well. But what's behind the effort to downplay it or to dismiss people as alarmists when talking about climate change?
I mean, the truth is, once we phase out coal, oil, and gas, and we have created an economy that runs essentially on clean, safe, new energy sources, solar, sunlight, wind, hydropowder, nuclear, geothermal, all the things that we can do to empower our economies, heat our homes, get us around without burning dead dinosaurs. Once that kind of economy is created, literally 90% of the people on this planet are going to be better off, because they're electricity costs are going to go down. Their heating and cooling costs at home are going to go down. Their transportation costs are going to go down. I mean, like practically to zero. And everyone's healthcare costs are going to go down because right now fossil fuels are so toxic and are putting so much air pollution into our atmosphere that, you know, phasing them out in the United States alone, this research from the Stanford economist Drew Schindel has shown, phasing them out in the United States alone would give us a healthcare savings of $700 billion a year. A year. So 90% of the people on this planet are going to be better off financially, healthier and wealthier. And we can all like exhale and know all the efforts we're making to like make sure our kids do their homework and like, you know, eat their vegetables and go to bed early are not going to be wasted because they will actually have a livable future. The problem is that the 1% and fossil fuel interests and everyone who holds fossil fuel stocks are going to lose some money, right? So the IPCC has said that right now, existing fossil fuel infrastructure is projected to emit the total carbon budget for pathways of halting global heating at 2 degrees Celsius, which is the target of the Paris Agreement, with like a 67% or greater likelihood. So that means all the fossil fuels we already have built are going to get us over the 2C target. So they're going to have to be retired before the end of their life. So basically, people own this stuff that should be now worthless. And they don't want to lose money. So basically, what's happening is they're willing to trash the only planet that we know supports life in like the whole known universe, ruin my kids' future, you know, the futures of all the kids on this planet. Already, you know, many kids in the global south have died and are suffering greatly from the effects of global heating, just so they can continue to make a little more money for another decade or two. I think it's absolutely disgusting.
I mean, I think so. And it just underscores, I know that Bill McKibben wrote a blurb for your book and is one of our greatest living activists. And he was just arrested outside of one of the major investment banks in New York. People are like, oh, why protest here? Why not protest ExxonMobil? No, it's the holders of the investments in those financial institutions. I mean, I'm sorry, in those oil and gas companies that are really holding the power here, because we see that Exxon's attempting to diversify to a degree and invest in other things or try to say like, oh, we're looking into this technology or whatever. They understand that without big banks and financiers, their entire model is going to collapse. And that's what's really seemingly the barrier here.
Mm-hmm. Let me stop you right there, and I hope you will forgive me for this.
Sure.
But when you said that Exxon is investing in new technologies and trying to diversify its portfolio, that's actually chapter 5 of my book on innovation.
Okay.
They're saying they're doing that. And
no, you need to correct me. This is why you're here. This is why you're here. Keep going.
This is why fossil fuel propaganda is so pernicious.
Right.
Because Exxon is saying that they're doing that. And they're placing ads in like totally legit publications like the New York Times proclaiming that they're doing all this research into alternative sources of energy. They're, you know, pouring money into research at universities. They look like they're trying. This is all part of their PR strategy. All of that money is part of their PR budget. But if you look at their total capital expenditure, they're only spending like maybe 1 to 4%, depending on the year, on alternative sources of energy. And those sources are very often bioenergy, which is basically just burning garbage. It's not actually innovating new things that are clean. So we all see these ads, we all hear the rhetoric from these oil and gas companies, and we think, okay, well, at least they're trying. They know they're going to have to diversify. No, this is just them trying to make us trust them, trying to paint themselves as not sociopaths who are happy to burn the planet to a crisp for money, but as like legitimate actors in a democracy. But you know what? They're really, really, really not. And the day that everyone realizes how dangerous coal, oil, and gas is to us and our children, and how essentially evil these people are, because they're also not only not investing in clean energy, they're also pouring money into lobbying against any policy to be passed by a government that would in fact support clean energy or in any way threaten fossil fuels. So they are doing everything they can to try to block the phase out of coal, oil, and gas and block the creation of a net zero economy.
How does carbon capture play into this? That's another technology that these companies tout, but is also an effort for or a focus of their lobbying efforts, even though largely, from my understanding, it's complete BS.
That's 100% correct. That's chapter 5. So chapter 5 is on the term innovation, and in climate discourse, innovation is code for carbon capture and carbon dioxide removal. So carbon capture is a technology that supposedly can sort of capture or grab emissions at the source where they're created. So like you stick a machine on a smokestack, for example, and supposedly it can suck up the carbon that is released when you like burn coal or whatever, and then you can send it through a pipeline and bury it on the ground. So oil and gas companies have been trying to get this technology, or have been claiming that they've been trying to get this technology in place for maybe 20 years now. And they've indeed gotten subsidies from the US government, which have been increased with every administration, Republican or Democratic. And to this day, they have never been able to capture even a majority of their targets. And their targets aren't even 100% of emissions. Their targets are like 85 or 90%. And they've only been capturing about 30%. And ironically, the process takes so much energy that very often when they try to establish it, they have to build a separate methane gas plant just to power the carbon capture, which means the whole kit and caboodle systemically is actually adding more emissions to the atmosphere. So that's carbon capture. It's total BS. It's one of these ways that, you know, these oil and gas companies manage to stay at the policymaking table with policymakers, because policymakers would love to be able to just stick a machine on fossil fuel power plants and be done with it. Like, they don't want the political struggle. So there's this way in which they're taking advantage of policymakers, you know, cowardice and credulity. And then the other problem with carbon dioxide removal is that it's actually really hard to break something after it's been, to put something back together that's already been broken. So, you know, it takes literally twice as much energy, or perhaps even more, to take the carbon out of the atmosphere than it did to put it there to begin with. So, for example, to take 1 million tons of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, which is only about 15 minutes of a whole year's emissions, you have to put solar panels on about somewhere around 2,000 acres, which is about 1,500 football fields worth of land, just to remove 15 minutes of emissions using clean energy. But the problem is, the technologies don't only use clean energy because there's a lot of heat involved in the process. So these technologies too are modeled using methane gas, which means that they're also adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. So we need carbon dioxide removal eventually for a net zero economy, because things like agriculture and construction do also put emissions into the atmosphere. But this is going to be like a technology that we're going to use around the margins. For those emissions, they're not something that can keep the fossil fuel system going. And this is what oil and gas is promising, that not only can these technologies keep, like, decarbonize oil, supposedly, they are the companies who are going to deliver this to the world, because they're the ones with this kind of expertise. This is all complete BS. And everybody should be aware that it's BS. And anytime you see it in, you know, advertising or on a website, or you read a journalist repeat this messaging, or a policymaker says it, know that they're lying to you, and that the truth is we have to stop using coal, oil and gas almost entirely.
And the almost, we've got this covered element of it. It's demobilizing because no one seems to be able to articulate the urgency in a way that isn't just being told as a tragedy, which I know you've talked about, the passivity of it, the demobilizing nature in which people will recognize that it's happening, as opposed to saying, well, here's what can be done to do that. I think in part it's the fact that this country has since, I don't know, for decades, really hollowed out its core of what advocacy looks like, and when or what activism looks like when you're putting pressure on capitalist institutions. Like, a lot of it's through market-based choices, and very much less through, hey, can the Democratic Party actually take a hand in the market and force these companies? And in my ideal world, we'd nationalize our oil and gas and then phase it out. But we're so far away from that conversation that I think the fact that we don't have enough of a society where political institutions are responsive to this and we just hand it over to the consultant class, that is at the real root of a lot of the rot that you describe.
I completely agree with you. And, part of the tragedy, if there is a tragedy anywhere, it's the tragedy of the neoliberal era, which has hollowed out the relationship between the citizen and the government, the democratic government that's supposed to represent them. And it has individualized and privatized absolutely everything. So especially with young people who are, in their 20s or even in their early 30s, who grew up in this era, they have no idea that actually you can, if you create a collectivity that speaks with a unified voice and doesn't let up, you actually can create change. And so political leaders like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are so important because they are articulating this vision of a new engagement for young people and for working class people and people of color across the United States. But the problem is, as we know, many elites in the Democratic Party are not getting out of the way for those new voices to actually take the lead.
What could you be talking about?
But the other issue is too, part of what my book says is that it's, it's not just the sort of evil right-wing people who are circulating these messages, right? The mainstream and even some people on the left sort of give a permission structure for this. So sometimes the climate crisis is represented as a problem of technology. If we just can develop the right technology, then, as you were suggesting, the market can kind of take over. And because clean energy is cheaper, then by definition, there's going to be a greater demand for it. And we see that this is not true because, solar has been cheaper than fossil fuels for years now, but the market is not free and fossil fuels are subsidized. And all of these things have a cost outlay that needs to be made public. It needs to be socialized and turned into a huge public works project that will, in fact, create a new burst of economic growth and lots of things that we want anyway. Right. So the point is that, there is a discourse about the climate crisis that it's either, an expression of human nature, right? As a woman, I can tell you right now, there is no such thing as human nature, because usually definitions of human nature only include how white men think, but actually there is a huge diversity of human experience. So it's not human nature, it's not technology, it's not, simply right-wing partisanship. It's this kind of hollowing out of the political as a form of power that is actually available to everybody in a democracy, which is why I think actually authoritarianism is so threatening right now, because people don't realize they already, right this moment, have the power to stop it, because today we are still a democracy and we can pass policies that will make our lives better. Even just calling your policymaker, your elected official once a week, literally just put it on your calendar once a week. Call your senators and your congressperson. And then if you're really serious, you can do it on the state level too. But at least your senators and your congressperson say, hi, my name is, I am in your, state or in your district, and I want you to pass policies that will phase out fossil fuels. And I am going to not vote for you if you don't do that. It literally takes like 4 minutes, 3 minutes once a week. And if everyone does that, I guarantee that within some months, we're going to have some discussion about passing robust climate policy.
Yeah, I hear you on that. It is fascinating to see that because of the incentive structure you describe, it feels like many elected Democrats are much more interested in maintaining wealth that already has been accrued versus actual growth, because we know that a Green New Deal style system that you talk about with AOC would provide like a resiliency to our economy, an upgrade, new growth for everybody involved, except for the people that currently hold significant positions in fossil fuel providers. It's just that's what's when we talk about growth in the economy. I think that is what's often missed, even if you want to put it in purely capitalistic terms.
I have nothing to add to that. Completely agree.
All right. Well, it was a little more spicy when you were correcting me on my accidental climate denial speak, but I really appreciate it. Dr. Genevieve Guenther, the book is linked to it in the description below. It's called The Language of Climate Politics, Fossil Fuel Propaganda, and How to Fight It. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, folks, quick break, and when we come back, we'll be with Ettingermentum as they go by of the excellent Ettingermentum newsletter, who saw some of this Biden collapse coming, also was pretty ahead of things like, no, it's not going to be a red wave in 2022, seems to have a really good grasp of the polling, and wanted to talk about how we got to this point with Biden. We'll be back with Ettingermentum in just a second. We are back with Ettingermentum of the Ettingermentum newsletter. It's on Substack. You should subscribe because you can get out ahead of things like, oh boy, Biden is going to collapse. Oh boy, the Republicans are lying about there being a red wave. If you're reading Ettingermentum, thanks so much for coming on. Really, really good to see you.
Yeah, hey, it's good to be back on. I think I was on a couple months ago to talk about like the politics of like attacking trans people.
Yes.
But now we have some like pretty big immediate stories to talk about. But yeah, so that is I am Ettingermentum. I think this is the first time I've like done a face reveal type thing. So hello everyone. Yeah, so I did, in case people here don't know me, I got started by posting into existence the 2022 midterms. I thought Republicans would not have a strong year, and they did not end up having a strong year for like mainly because of abortion. I was somebody who was pretty big on that. And then pretty immediately after that, once I started writing around April 2023, I wrote that I thought that even though I thought Democrats were in a good position, it would probably be best if Biden didn't run. And we're seeing how that's going about a year and 3 months or so later.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take ourselves into a time machine a bit. I know Biden would like to do that, but we can at least do that from now from a storytelling perspective. So the red wave in 2022 that Republicans were saying was imminent. What was the polling data showing at that particular point, and why were you skeptical about those claims?
Yeah, it's kind of like it's interesting because fundamentally this is kind of like a little simple. In 2022, people believed that a red wave was going to happen not because of the polling, but because of what they determined the fundamentals to be. There was 8% inflation. Biden was deeply unpopular. There were like overseas conflicts. Historically, that had correlated pretty strongly with the out of power party making gains in Congress and in the governorships and the state legislators. But what was interesting that entire time is that the polling was never actually all that good for Republicans. At this point, around 2 years ago, they were trailing in almost every major competitive Senate race. They were down in Ohio. They were down in Wisconsin. They were actually on track to lose seats. And like you could see, like in these special election results and the way the demographics were like sort of responding and trending, then this seemed to be in response to abortion. It's or like Republicans being very far right. So it looked like the electorate was responding to different issues and what people anticipated. So, and the polling remained about like that throughout the year. And it was kind of a battle between pushing for this new understanding of the election that was different from the traditional understanding of the race based on like economic fundamentals, but looking more at what voters were like actually saying. And what voters were actually saying ended up being broadly correct. The fundamentals based models did not actually correspond much with the actual outcome.
Can you just pause for a sec, explain what fundamentals mean for the audience? Because it's really just about how, in 2010, Obama got elected in 2008 by a significant margin. And then in 2010, we know that there was this Tea Party backlash. Typically, when a president comes in, the opposing party to that president is motivated to come out in the midterms. That's, I'm assuming, what you mean by the fundamentals.
Yeah, and it's that fact which actually did occur. Republicans actually did have a substantial turnout advantage in 2022. That's often forgotten. People assume that it was like after the results, people immediately credit it to like a rise in like youth turnout or black turnout. Youth, like Democratic turnout that year was actually quite weak. It was about as weak as you'd expect for any midterm that usually results in a wave. What happened and the reason why the results were so poor for Republicans is that Democrats did very well in terms of persuasion with this electorate that otherwise was very poor for them. They did very well. They won their base year unanimously. They did very well with independents and they won some Republicans. So even though the actual electorate was just as bad as you would usually expect, it didn't really correspond with like the gains you would expect because there were the extraneous problems of inflation, abortion, and Trump's lingering sort of presence. He was a very dominant figure in the party, while Biden, unpopular as he was sort of seen as a more transitional figure who didn't necessarily define liberalism. People disliked him because they thought he was a weak and old leader. But just because the president is unique and old doesn't mean that like his ideology is necessarily like bad. Right. So like people were fine with voting for Raphael Warnock or Mark Kelly, these more generic kind of liberals who didn't have Biden's unique issues of like presiding over a lost war or looking frail and not having any media appearances or like whatever other problems people had with Biden. So Democrats did well, and their success didn't really correlate with Biden's standing because they weren't Biden, and he was kind of a marginal figure in terms of like how people were thinking. So after 2022, I was in general very high on Democrats. I thought that like the issues of abortion and Trump's continued unpopularity and his continued presence was going to give them this sort of baseline anti-Trump majority that we've seen basically since 2016. I thought that was kind of a feature of politics that Republicans had to work around and weren't capable of working around. And you can see this has actually come to pass in the Senate races this year, where you have these popular incumbents and strong recruits across the country. In every single swing state and a couple red states, Democrats have consistently led at nearly every single poll throughout the entire year. So as far as liberalism goes, this isn't like the 1980s or even 2010. Like basic generic Democrats can be very well received and popular and broadly electable. The problem that I saw with Biden at the start of 2023, and like I think the way I put it was Democrats were coming into the year with a lot of advantages, but he was the only one who could squander them, one of the few that could squander them besides Kamala, I thought at the time, and look at where we are now. Because of his, people were looking at his approval rating at the time, once again, looking at the economic fundamentals model as a reflection of the economy. And the economy looked like it was on track to recover, which it eventually did. And there was the assumption that running him was a sure bet because he was an incumbent, and the fundamentals say that the incumbents usually do well. The economy was going to get better, so his approval rating was going to improve. But I had looked throughout the history of his approval rating up to that point, and he was remarkably very stagnant since the collapse of the Afghan government in the fall of 2021. It very rarely ever moved in response to these very big events. Like it fell during the peak of inflation, and then it slightly went up a bit after he passed his big bills. But that was basically all the movement. And I had looked at sort of like the way his reputation had changed in terms of like how people perceived his competency. And I was thinking it's worth considering that his reputation is based more on perceptions of his character than it is on the actual sort of material environment. It's more about his reputation, how he's sort of been transformed in the popular consciousness from this elder statesman type figure to a kind of a doddering old man who isn't fit to run the country. And I sort of thought, like, if this sort of perception is baked in as it is, not really much will be capable of changing it. And if anything, it's going to get worse because he's only going to get older with time. And over the past year and 2 months, as he's run his reelection campaign and he's pushed forward with these messaging that should be popular, he's had events that should happen. I mean, like Gaza notwithstanding, which was horrific for him, I think, like in terms of impacting his reputation, like the fundamentals should be working in his favor. He should be in a better position than he was when I wrote that article, but he's in a substantially worse position. He's actually at the worst approval rating of his entire presidency. And it's because he's being perceived along these very unique lines of his unique age, his uniquely extreme age, which I think a lot of people were kind of slow to realize, and they didn't want to realize because it was a bit of a fatalistic argument about him.
I was slow to it.
Yeah,
I thought there was a possibility that he could close those massive margins that you're seeing in Senate races versus his presidential campaign by having some sort of performance at the debate where he was able to show a contrast with him and Trump. I was actually optimistic about that case, but Well, I'm right. Well, you have to reevaluate because it's the most historic debate, historically horrible debate to performance, frankly, just in terms of outcome in the history of this country. People point to the Nixon debate versus JFK, but that's more of a contrast between who listened on the radio versus who watched on television than the universal, like, holy crap moment that we're seeing with Biden. And what you've been pointing out in your newsletter and throughout is that the Democrats' position in terms of negative partisanship with Trump is actually quite advantageous. There's going to be abortion on the ballot in two of the most important states in the Electoral College in Nevada and Arizona. Can you talk a bit about the Democrats' position if they were to just have a non-Biden candidate at the top of the ticket? As it relates to the down ballot races, potentially helping at this point buoy a candidate that people are less familiar with.
Yeah. I think if you could just put a generic Democrat basically of the same quality as like a Ruben Gallego or an Alyssa Slotkin or any of these other incumbents, and it's not that I think that like those are amazing political talents, but they're just generic, younger, more sort of trustworthy, telegenic, marketable liberals. There's somebody who you can imagine being in a leadership position and not, or driving your car and not really being necessarily worried about if you'll make it home at night. Like, it's very, very simple. These liabilities that Biden has are very unique, and they aren't really necessarily an issue with this party as a whole in the way that like Trump's ideology is. When Trump takes over the party and he makes everybody follow his line, people are going to judge Republicans the same way they judge Trump. Biden doesn't necessarily have that same presence. He's judged as a uniquely incapable person, like a uniquely incapable figure, like not really this somebody who represents a dangerous ideology or something that is uniquely terrifying. He's just somebody people don't think should be president. It's not that like they think that necessarily his ideas are bad. They just don't think he should be in power for 4 more years. And it's hard to say they're exactly all that wrong after seeing what we saw last night.
Let's
it's
pull
hard
up
to,
this data just to augment here what you're saying. This came out this morning, ABC News, Washington Post, Ipsos. This is not, some random poll that you're seeing on the internet. This is significant. 2/3 of Americans in the new ABC News, Washington Post, Ipsos poll, including a majority of Democrats, say Joe Biden should step aside as his party's presumptive nominee for president. And they talk about his age. If we could show that 85% of Americans say he's too old for another term. 2/3 say that he should quit the race. And if we could go to the breakdown by ideology on page 2 here. Percentage, here we go. So 67% say Biden should step aside. 62% of Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents say he should step aside. And 54% of self-identified Biden supporters say he should step aside. Now, what's your assessment of that data? Is that good?
No, that if you're running for president, you would ideally not want to see that. That is not something, all else equal, you would want to be the case for your presidency. But before we go into like kind of the Biden death watch sort of thing, I do think it's worth noting with those numbers. This is fundamentally what people want. This is an outcome that people want to see happen. So when I see people talk about the chaos or the backlash that could happen from rocking the boat, people aren't going to be mad at you for giving you what they want. If you have a contested convention, people will be pissed at you for nominating a person they don't think is capable of serving. They won't be mad at you for examining a different option. So
it demonstrates a pliability that you need to show commitment to democracy, because even though people aren't voting and they didn't, because information was withheld from them, or things declined since basically Biden was already the presumptive nominee to a degree. That means that though they have new information, so this still demonstrates democratic responsiveness, even if it's not through elections.
Yeah, and the primary that was just a pro forma process. I don't think it's worth really taking seriously as a democratic exercise at all.
Yeah,
I mean, he wasn't running against anybody seriously. The entire party rallied around him. There were several states where they either didn't hold the primary or there just weren't any names on the ballot besides him. It's just, and I'm certain that this isn't like something that people will be despondent over. Biden has never been a defining figure in the way that Obama or Trump has. He was selected to fulfill a role. The role was beating Trump. He's not an indispensable figure, whether he wants to believe so or not. He seems to very desperately want to be one, but he's not, unfortunately for him. There's no base of Biden diehards who will sit out in this election if he's replaced. It is a very, I think, risk for the standards of replacing a presidential nominee 4 months before an election. There's not a lot of risk involved here, at least not nearly as much as people would make it out to be. There's a lot of stuff people are saying about the consequences of replacing him that just flat out isn't true. Stuff about him not being able to be on the ballot. If they were
talk about that. I mean, for some Democratic Biden dead enders are now citing the Heritage Foundation, who are clearly putting out this stuff about how they're going to sue to keep Kamala Harris or whoever off the ballot. They're putting that out there to scare Biden into staying in.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's a complete lie. They are doing that and the Biden people are citing it to
Trump hasn't even selected his vice president. How can the ballots already be set? They're not set.
I know they're not set. He's the presumptive nominee because we assume he will be nominated, but the party has ballot access. The candidate isn't the one with ballot access. He was nearly going to miss Biden was nearly going to miss the nomination in Ohio. They did change the laws, so that was possible because he was so very much not the actual candidate yet. He is definitively not on the ballot. That is why he nearly missed deadlines like in Ohio. The party has ballot access depending on them nominating somebody, but that person does not have to be Biden. Legally, he is nothing. Legally, he is as much as a presidential candidate right now as you or I. It's a complete nonsense thing. People are literally just lying about that. Stuff about transferring money is a bit more accurate, but I mean, everybody's kind of on the Kamala train right now, and they can just give it to her very easily. If you were in the situation where you had Whitmer or somebody that was a nominee, you could transfer that to the DNC or a PAC and do most of what that would have done in the first place. It's just you can do that. There's not nearly as much friction as people are making it out to be. They're trying to run out the clock and scare people, and who knows if that'll work or not. But it's certainly not a pathway to actual success.
Yeah, well, Kamala Harris is in North Carolina this afternoon. She's going to be rallying with Roy Cooper, the former governor, or still governor, but I guess outgoing governor in North Carolina.
Yeah, term limited.
Right, term limited out, but was a blue or Democratic governor in a state that's purple to red leaning, and the Democrats could actually, if they want a path to victory, a fighting chance in North Carolina seems like a pretty good bet. What is your assessment of people reflexively saying Kamala can't win?
Oh, I mean, it's to the extent that, I mean, they're polling they're like, to the extent that she can't win is the same extent that Biden can't win. They're in incredible polling right now, not done by like Harris, which is run by Mark Penn, who's a total complete hack at this point. He's the guy who did those insanely tilted polls meant to give Israel talking points for their war.
Right.
He had been like putting out polls that showed her like losing to Trump by 7. More credible polling, including some done by Split Ticket and Data for Progress, actually just yesterday, shows Biden and Harris either like statistically tied or Harris like doing better than Biden. Harris is not exactly, I wouldn't call her an ideal pick. I've always had her very low on the rankings and lists I've done. She has her own flaws. She isn't very experienced. She's never really faced a competitive race or has had to win swing voters before. She very nearly lost in California in 2010. Not an ideal person. In comparison to Biden, it would be like just leaps and bounds better because she can actually campaign. You'd be starting from the same baseline. You'd be getting far more excitement, an opportunity for a reset, like an ability to redefine the campaign around something other than Biden being legitimately too old to serve. Like you would get a VP pick who you could inspire more confidence than Kamala does herself, somebody outside of this very unpopular administration. Like, it's just like, if you like are trying to like argue that Kamala can't win, then Biden can't win to the same exact extent, and you should be arguing for an open convention as a Hail Mary. But like this, if you think that like all is lost with her, Biden is even worse. There's no argument.
She hasn't started campaigning yet in earnest. The polling is going to lag, and also she has upside where the floor is still higher than Biden. Can we pull up this part of the ABC poll that just came out where it shows that Biden is still behind Trump, and a reminder that as a rule, it appears that this is the part. This might be in the actual article, but I'm not exactly sure. It doesn't necessarily matter. I can recall it. Biden is below Trump within the margin of error. Kamala Harris is up by 3 points in this post-debate poll. That was a pop-up. And although honestly a good soundtrack to get us revved up for Kamala Harris. Yeah, but anyway, she's up by 3 points. Now, of course, polls there's gonna be some variance, right? And you have to take these things in the aggregate, and you have to differentiate between crap polls like you describe and good polls like this one. But the point is just that the Democrats need to win by 3 to 4 points or more in the national popular vote, I think, for them to have a good chance with the Electoral College. Biden won by 5 points in 2020, right?
4.5. And 4. I would say it's gotten a little better for them. It's not near, I don't think the bar is that high because they've disproportionately lost support among demographics that don't represent swing states. Like we've seen the polls about how they plummeted in support in New York, like only up there by in the high single digits, not doing as well in California either. So that cost them a lot of the popular vote. At the same time, they haven't lost nearly as much support in states like Michigan, Wisconsin, or Pennsylvania. So like the kind of baseline for a national popular vote win, I think it's a bit less strict than it is for them. I think you'd probably want them to win by about 2 or 1.5 to win the election, which is it's a difference from 2020, which was they needed to win by nearly 4 to win, or like 3.5. It's not like the greatest. I think it was 4 points. So I think that like it's not like that. I don't think the hill is that big of a hill to climb. It's still like a thing you need to surmount, but I don't think it's like really like that over.
Right. That's what I'm. And even with Harris, if she drives turnout, the point is that with Biden on the ticket, Democrats are poised to lose dozens of seats in the House, to set themselves back in the Senate, where if Trump is going to win, the Democrats need to at least drive turnout down ballots so that the Republicans don't have these massive margins to do whatever the hell they want in the Senate and the House.
They could very well win the House while Trump wins. Like, that's an open possibility, and that could make a huge difference. Biden is putting that at danger.
In jeopardy.
Yeah, because not only losing, but losing by quite a lot.
And that's why Pelosi is reportedly telling members behind closed doors that they can speak out and tell Biden to withdraw if they want to, and she may be making moves behind the scenes. It's insane that we have to rely on another octogenarian, Chuck Schumer as well.
Who's technically a backbencher. Hakeem Jeffries is the fakest leader of all time.
Right.
She's big timing him really hard right now.
Yeah. So I guess, what is your assessment then of where we are right now ahead of this press conference tonight?
Yeah, well, I think my kind of take on it, I'm still kind of in wait and see mode since kind of putting this out a couple of days ago, which is that Biden, from what I saw during his interview, is going all in basically on intimidation tactics, basically scaring Democrats into thinking, well, he's not going to ever drop out, and we don't want to hurt him if he doesn't drop out. So it's best to just kind of put a lid on this and just hope for the best. And like, by thinking that there's nothing they could say or do that could actually get him to leave. I think that ended up scaring a lot of like kind of less politically adept members of Congress into, you think I'm kind of referring to someone in particular here. You can kind of take that implication for what you will. But like people with less good instincts from kind of like realizing that he is kind of bluffing here and saying something that's very perfunctory, because if he's even has a chance of staying in the race, he's going to insist that he's in it, like until the moment he drops out. Like, that's just the way this stuff works. So that was kind of what he was doing. And like I think that like kind of the gambit he was making with Democrats was, well, I may have a 30% chance to win now. You may think that Kamala has a 50% chance to win or whatever, but you're never going to get her. And if you keep on saying you want to get her and trying to get me out, you're going to make it a 0% chance to win, and I'll lose, and it'll be your fault. So do what's in your power to give us the best chance of winning. The problem is, and what I think he kind of made a misstep in, is that he hasn't done anything to convince people that he actually has a path to victory in the first place. This isn't like an issue of like trying to get the luxury of getting like a small chance to win into a slightly larger one. As far as a lot of Democrats are rightfully concerned at this point, given like that he hasn't articulated any path to winning at all, he might as well have a 0% chance to win, because he has no plan to effectively campaign. All of the reasons that he says he's going to beat Trump are just rehashings of these talking points that sound great on paper, but he's been trying to say for a full year and haven't moved the needle at all. Like, just going on and on about how you created 15 million jobs after COVID. Like, I mean, that, like, sure, that makes a good ad, but you've been like spending like crazy for the past, like, I don't know how many months, and it obviously hasn't improved your fortunes. And then like, it's just like stuff like that, just reheating old talking points that failed to move the needle, and he can't articulate when he's actually speaking and campaigning, and then just saying like, well, there was a primary, so that's it. That's not convincing people, and it doesn't provide an actual pathway to victory. So to the extent that people genuinely care about winning this election, he has done nothing to actually show them why they should actually stick with him. And I think what some Democrats are realizing as like this kind of goes forward and they kind of look into the abyss of just sticking by him, they're like, what are we actually gaining here? Like, let's say we stick by him and we try to keep him as like kind of like as little damage as possible. We don't attack him. We don't call him too old. How will that really help? Like you gave him this convention where everything's united and everybody talks about how awesome and great of a president he is. Is anybody going to believe that? Is anybody that's just going to hurt your credibility because you're saying something you clearly don't believe and obviously isn't true, that he's capable of serving. So I think they kind of looked at what he's actually asking them to do and how little he's actually provided. And they've realized like, shit, like this isn't really like a clearly safe way to go. So you've seen kind of like a revving up of like the sort of people calling him to drop out. There was a swing district Democrat from Michigan, Hillary Schulten, I think, who said he should drop out this morning. They're sort of trying to ease him into it because they know he's basically like a 81-year-old man child by just trying to say, well, it's your choice, and just sort of saying, I know you've already said you've made a choice, but not that choice. We want a different choice.
Right.
And I think the George Clooney thing yesterday was a pretty big escalation. Going as far as to say that he regularly acts like how he did during the debate is a major blow to his narrative that it was just a bad night.
Yep.
I think if you're looking at stuff that would be like the nuclear option of like trying to permanently damage him to the extent that even he realizes that he's been even he in his deluded mind where he thinks that he's the only person who he alone can fix it, can see that he can't go on like this. That would be the type of thing you're looking at. So I think there is a renewed push to actually kind of get this show on the road finally. And it's his own fault because he can't I would say he should give an explanation for how he can win, but I really can't think of one. I'll do my best to think of one. I'll try to think of any precedent for somebody turning this kind of campaign around. I've always thought he should win, but at this point, it's hard to really say what he can do.
Yeah, well, it's just going to get worse and worse. I mean, every day that we're spending focusing on this is a day that we're not focusing on Donald Trump. And I can't blame the press, and I can't blame the focus. I mean, people that are whining about that, folks, Donald Trump's got a lot. He's got a lot of press attention over the past 10 years. I don't know if people have been awake or asleep, but the narrative is pretty set on him. People think he's a scumbag, and some people like that. And they may turn out enough, and enough independents may not turn out because they're not inspired by Biden to hand this election to him in a way that is irreparable for Democrats in the country for many election cycles, because it takes a lot to undo some of this stuff. Lastly, I know we're keeping you a little bit long, but
it's fine.
My final question for you is, a lot of people are throwing water on polling data and saying polling's been wrong. Polling was wrong in 2016, wrong in 2018, wrong in 2020, wrong in 2022. They have a case for 2016, but a lot of that was corrected. My understanding is polling was pretty on point 2018, 2020, 2022.
Yeah. Well, polling actually was very accurate and pretty reliable in 2018 and 2022. 2020 was there was a significant polling error that year, but that was for a very specific reason, and it did actually work in favor of Democrats. So unlike the shit Biden saying, where he's like, everybody counted me out, nobody thought I could win in 2020. He was leading by 10 points nearly that entire cycle. To the extent the polls were wrong, they significantly overestimated him, especially in some swing states like Wisconsin. But the reason for that was because there was COVID that year, and people were in case it's newsflash for some people who weren't aware of that. There was COVID, and Democrats, liberals were staying inside, and Republicans and conservatives were going outside. And when you're staying inside, you have bored and you have nothing to do all day. When a pollster calls you, you're going to pick up. So throughout that entire cycle, and in a way that nobody really prepared or adjusted for, Democrats had and liberals in general had a significantly higher response rate to pollsters than conservatives did. And that was across all demographics, even to the extent you had Republicans who were picking up the phone that year, they were Biden supporting Republicans. When you had independents who were picking up the phone, they were Biden supporting independents. So the unique circumstances of 2020 made it so there was a pretty large across the board bias in favor of Democrats in most state and national polling. COVID is not currently going on. It went away. So in 2022, you had similar polling. People doubted it for similar reasons. They thought there could be an error, even though the error in 2020 was very specific and was not being replicated. And it wasn't replicated in 2022 to the extent it did happen. It's just that it overestimated Democrats earlier in the year. Fetterman was leading in his race by 11 points in the summer. Tim Ryan was winning in Ohio. Mandela Barnes was winning in Wisconsin, and their leads went down as the election cycle ended. So there's no and the ultimate numbers were very accurate to reality. The national popular vote is very similar to what the polls said. The Senate races nearly all went along with polling. To the extent that there was stuff that was missed, it was that there were fake Republican polls by these right-wing firms trying to gin up donations to their candidates by presenting good polling that gave their clients fantastical leads. And that like kind of did screw with the averages a bit. It was why 538 said the Republicans were favored to win at the end of the year because they didn't select properly for these like polling. But like if you looked at like stuff like Marist or the New York Times or like these other like kind of very highly rated pollsters that are all showing poor numbers for Biden now, you'd have had a very clear picture of what the actual election was. So the idea the pundits were wrong that year, some of them were wrong. I personally wasn't, and I think that Biden's in terrible shape right now. So like, what do you make of that? I guess. Like it's just it's not a true story. The fact that Biden himself is saying it is embarrassing. It shows that he's either just flatly lying in this desperate bid to like just stay on the ticket for whatever reason, or he just doesn't understand how the stuff works. Which is he's been in politics since like the Nixon administration, so he should know how it works. But like it's just stuff like that is stuff that actual political professionals, including a lot of elected officials, do understand. And they see Biden saying stuff that just flatly isn't true. It doesn't earn him much favor.
Absolutely. It's one thing if he's lying to the public, but if he's lying to them, that's when things start to get a little bit messy, I think. So
I mean, politicians all lie.
Yeah.
But nobody likes being lied to.
Right. Ettingermentum, a must follow on this particular story, and you've been on point. And people should also read your piece, The Electoral Guide to Transphobia, I believe.
Yeah, electoral history of transphobia.
Apologies. Yeah, it's a piece I cite quite frequently. I have it bookmarked because it shows how these transphobic campaigns run by Republicans are both unmotivating and also hateful at the same time. So it's a great aggregation of all of that data. Thanks so much. The Ettingermentum newsletter, we will link to that below wherever people are listening to or watching this.
Yeah, great to be on. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. Thanks for coming on.
Bye.
All right. Bye. With that, we will wrap up the free part of this program, head into the fun half. The number is 646-257-3920. If you are in Texas and you want to talk about what you're going through right now with the effects of the hurricane and the fact that this is another climate-related instance where the grid in Texas is unresponsive because of privatization.
Oh, look, a company that is that came about because of deregulation in Texas is in charge of the response to and recovery in Houston. What a great system we have. So.
Yeah. We will would love to take your calls. On ESPN, Bradley and I talked a little bit about the WNBA halfway through the seasons, a little bit about the Olympics that were coming up, and we did some tiers for teams in the offseason. YouTube.com/ESPN show. Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Left Reckoning. Well, people should go out last week if they haven't checked it out, which I mean, 35,000 people have. Emma Vigeland's appearance on Left Reckoning, a record-setting week. Also, we talked about UK and Iranian elections this week, and we'll be talking with Matt McManus about his liberal socialism book coming up. Patreon.com/Left Reckoning. Also, follow Majority Report on TikTok. And I'm on TikTok as well if you want to give me a follow. I'm not very active. I did one video of Josh Hawley. I posted Josh Hawley to that. She's a runner. She's a track star.
I'm trying to be more active on there, too. It's just...
Yeah, you have been... Emma, you've been editing your own videos on there and stuff like that. Emma will put in the work. She's very much in front of the camera, but she's willing to get behind the editing software. And
people don't realize all of those. I'm not trying to brag here, but people have been writing in saying I should get out on the campaign trail. All those Trump supporter segments I produced and edited literally myself.
Yep, lunch pail sort of worker.
All right, check out Left Reckoning, and then we will bring in our friends Brandon Sutton and Matt Binder. They're coming in. Hey, and we'll bring them on. As you're bringing them on, your support means the world for us. I mean, God, if we're talking about a second Trump administration, we need
join the MajorityReport.com.
Join the MajorityReport.com.
Trump's FCC might not be so great about letting streams.
Oh my God!
I think that definition of anti-Semitism, saying if you look at Israel wrong, you're done. We need all the help we can get.
Appreciate that, and say hello to our friends Matt Binder, Brandon Sutton. Hello, guys.
Hello.
Hello. Anything happening in the news?
No.
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 All right. Well, so what are you even talking about on your shows, Matt Binder?
Nothing. Just sitting there and watching the camera. No, on the live stream last night, youtube.com/Matt Binder had a listener who's been providing us updates from France call in to tell us about how what went down in France with the elections and how a united left basically helped take down the far right in France. If only there was a lesson to be learned. youtube.com/Matt Binder.
All right. And Brandon Sutton, what's happening on the discourse?
Yes, actually, last week in celebration of 4th of July, I decided to talk about a movie instead of talking about politics because politics are sad. So I talked about a movie that made me sad instead, Alex Garland's Civil War. So you can catch that on what? I mean, it's a sad film.
movie.
We were fixing something with the audio, but yeah. So did that movie have like nothing to say? That's what I've heard.
Yes, it had a lot to say, but none of it was very good or smart.
Okay.
So you can check that out on the Patreon. It's a public episode, and I'm actually going to post it on the SoundCloud too, so you don't have to go over there if you don't want to. But
It seems like it might have had the issue. I think it was whichever Far Cry was, like Far Cry 5, where it was set in like rural Montana, and it was supposed to be like right after Trump won. And I'm like, oh hell yeah, we're gonna be able to get to have a first-person shooter where I take on a white supremacist cult in Montana right after Trump wins. It's like pretty much exactly the catharsis I need. And then you actually play the game, and the cult are the bad guys that are sort of clan, like sort of iconography, is the most multicultural group you will ever get in Montana.
There you go.
And it's like, why did we pull the punch here? Why couldn't they have just been like actual ideology that's a problem in this country instead of some weird thing? I don't know.
It's so weird. I mean, they did this. I was seeing this old clip of Seventh Heaven where Simon wears his pants too low, and it's like you can't. You know that originated at gangs, and he's hanging out with a group of kids all after school listening to hip hop, and that's the kind of music that's going to get him in trouble. And it's like 20 white kids, but they're just like with chains on. It's like, who are we fooling here? Yeah. Seventh Heaven.
I remember that, and it's messed up because they chastised him way more for like sagging his pants, and they chastised their other two kids for making out. That was like way more, I think, inappropriate.
Right.
But I mean, I find the movie Civil War to be quite boring, but I will say it's inexplicable that it's been made in 2024. It feels like a movie that would have made a lot more sense in 2009 or like 2012, like when America being divided was just, abstractly divided because you couldn't picture it because of Obama's race, was a much more like hot topic issue, and like people were much more hysterical about it. But now we know why America is divided, and it's pretending like it's not something serious is just not in anyone's best.
Or pretending like California and Texas would be on the same side in the Civil War is just like probably an odd place to start.
Well, I don't find that to be very. That's not my major problem with it, because I think if you can accept that either state is going to be homogenous political enough to want to secede from the union and not break down due to like intra-state fighting, then they could go either way, right? Because California is very conservative, like outside of LA. The fact that he thought that was a big political statement, like, oh, these two like states that are nothing alike are going to be like on the same side in a civil war. It's like they're very much alike, especially demographically, if you consider like the influx of Latinos. So like there are a lot of things that are similar about like Texas, but I think he's just overly. I mean, he is clearly unfamiliar with America, which is what makes the movie very funny. He's
British.
Well, hey. Who should know better about America than the British people? I mean, they invented it.
All right. Well, I don't want to give away your whole Patreon episode, but I am curious about your thoughts. I'll check that out myself.
It's free, so listen.
We will, and then I'm sure we'll be talking about Biden in the fun half a little bit more. I know Brandon has some thoughts that we've been chatting about. Yeah.
Oh, that's what you guys been talking about? Yeah. That's the hot topic of the day?
A little bit.
Well, it's crazy because we
hold on. We'll go into the fun half. We'll talk about it there, right? We got to tease this. This is called Existing Under Capitalism, okay? YouTube.com/ES. Oh, wait, no. I did that already. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now. And I don't think it's going to be the same as it looks like in 6 months from now. And I don't know if it's necessarily going to be better 6 months from now than it is 3 months from now. But I think around 18 months out, we're going to look back and go like, wow. What? What is that going on? It's nuts. Wait a second. Hold on for a second.
The Majority Report.
Emma, welcome to the program.
Hey.
Matt.
What is up, everyone?
Nomi Key.
You did it. Let's go, Brandon.
Let's go, Brandon.
Bradley, you want to say hello?
Sorry to disappoint everyone. I'm just a random guy.
It's all the boys today.
Fundamentally false.
No, I'm sorry. Women's.
Stop talking
Oh,
for a
wow.
second and let me finish.
Where is this coming from, dude?
But dude, you want to smoke this 7A?
Yes.
Hi, me? Is me?
Yes.
Is this me?
Is it me?
It is you.
Is this me? Hello? Is this me?
I think it is you. Who is you? No sound. Every single freaking day. What's on your mind?
Sports. We can discuss free markets and we can discuss capitalism.
I'm going to go throw up.
Who libertarians? They're so stupid, though. Common sense says, of course.
Gobbledygook.
We fucking nailed him.
So what's 79 plus 21?
Challenge Matt.
I'm positively quivering.
I believe 96, I want to say.
857-210-35 501 1 half 3 8s
9/11, for instance.
$3,400, $1,900.
5 4 $3 trillion sold. It's a zero-sum game.
Actually, you're making me think less of it.
But let me say this. Poop.
You can call it satire. Sam goes with satire.
On top of it all,
Yeah.
my favorite part about you is just like every day, all day, like everything you do.
Without a doubt. Hey, buddy, we see you. All right, folks.
It's just the week being weeded out, obviously.
Yeah, sun's out, guns out. I don't know.
But you should know.
Okay, Emma, please.
Well, I feel that my voice is sorely lacking on the Majority Report.
Wait. Whoa. Look, Sam is unpopular.
I do deserve a vacation at Disney World. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome Emma to the show.
It is Thursday.
Yeah, I think you need to take over for Sam.
Yes, please.
No. I'm gonna pause you right there.
Wait, what?
You can't encourage Emma to live like this. And I'll tell you why. She was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. She was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. What? Tour, sushi, and poker.
Tim's upset?
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. She was offered a tour, sushi, and
that's what we call it in the biz.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Right.
Tour, sushi, and poker.
We're gonna get demonetized.
I just think that what you did to Tim Pool was mean.
Free speech.
That's not what we're about here. Look at how sad he's become now. We shouldn't even talk about it because I think you're responsible.
I probably am in a certain way, but let's get to the meltdown here.